On this mini lesson, we're going to be learning how to make brushes on Procreate. To start, if we go to our little brush, we'll be set to our brush library. Procreate already gives us plenty of brushes to work with, but we can always create our own to fit our needs better. So to start, we're going to be making a sketch brush, a line brush, a shader, a coloring brush, and then a flower stamp. First, we're going to start with sketch brush. So if we click our little plus sign here, it's going to bring us to our brush studio. First of all, we're going to be looking at increasing or decreasing our spacing between the little blocks. I like to do anywhere between 10 and 15% for our sketching, so we're going to do about 11% there. And over here on our drawing pad, we can always test it out to see how it's going to look and clear it out whenever we are ready. Next up is going to be our stabilization. This increases how smooth our line is, depending on how much we want it. This is really good for when you're doing calligraphy or lining or wording to make it smoother, but for sketching, we don't have to worry about that, so we'll leave that in on. Next up is tapering, where we can increase the tapers on our brush by using these sliders right here. Increase the size on that and the opacity to make them appear. And decide how much we want them tapered. Now that gives us a pretty sharp line. So we're going to decrease that just a little bit. And then we can see our little tapers. But if we increase the tip, it's going to make it more rounded out and more blunt. And then all the way on the left is going to make it sharp. We want it pretty sharp, so we're going to leave it at the bottom. Next step is going to be the shape of our stamp and our blocks. So if we go to Edit, Import, Procreate already gives us a really nice big source library with plenty of things to choose from. But I like to do the acrylic block. So we're going to scroll down until we find that. But if we don't feel like scrolling, we can always go to our search library right up on the top. So we're going to do the acrylic square. Click Done. And it's going to change that block there for us. And then scatter, if we increase the scatter, it's going to move the little blocks around. And the rotation as well is going to move them. But we don't really need to worry about that. Next for grain, again we can go to Edit, Import, and click on Source File, and it gives us another really big library to choose from. I like doing just a good basic charcoal vine for my sketches. That gives us a nice texture in our brush, along with the shape. But of course, if you don't want that, you can always just leave it how it is. Next up for rendering, we can choose from a light glaze, uniform glaze, intense glaze, heavy glaze, uniform blending, or intense blending. But I just like to kind of leave it at the intense glaze. Next up, if we go to dynamics, it's going to increase the size of our brush, if we want it real small, or if we want it bigger, or the opacity of our brush, if we want to bring it lower or not. Jitter is going to make them a little crazy to say the least, but we don't really need to worry about that. Apple Pencil just affects how your pencil is going to change, depending on how you hold it and just how you move your brush. But you don't really need to worry about that if you're going to be using your fingers or a different type of stylus. Next for properties, we can change how it's going to be shown. So if we use stamp property, click Done, it's going to show it as just that little block of what that looks like. But I like to have it as kind of a line. The preview size will also increase and decrease how big the line is. So if we decrease it, it's going to make it a real thin brush. But then if we increase it, it's going to make it a lot more thicker. So I like to have it at a nice little happy medium. The brush behavior will increase how big it can possibly be and how small it can be. Minimum size is a none. And we're going to make the maximum size a little bigger just so we don't have to worry about covering too much space. There we go. Maximum opacity, you can change that depending on how opaque you want the brush so you don't have to worry about it too much. And the minimum opacity, I like to leave the maximum as max and the minimum at none. Finally, you can go to About This Brush. We can name our brush. We're going to name it our sketch. And then you can also always sign your name there as well. And hit Done. And then we have our sketch brush right there. We can go to test it out. And we like how that looks, so we can go ahead and move on to our next brush. For that next brush, we're going to be making a brush to line with. So spacing, I like to decrease this to about 10, just to make the blocks nice and close to each other. Stabilization, I do like to increase it on this one a bit, just so I don't have to worry about any rogue brush strokes that I don't mean to make. but you can always increase it or decrease it however to fit your liking. Next, taper. I like to increase the taper on these brushes a little bit, but you can always change how much you like the taper to be. Alright, and that looks good to me, so we can move on to the shape. Now for this one, I do like to go to our source library. I do like to keep it at the one that it comes with, which is the hard one, but you can always change it to any of these other ones if you'd like. And click done. And same for green. I don't like to have much green in my liners, but you can always change that if you'd like. Dynamics, I also don't normally worry about that one too much, but we can increase the size a little bit. And the opacity. Apple pencil, I like to just move my brushes all the way to there. Clear that out. We're going to increase our preview size just a little bit. Maximum size, I like to keep my liners pretty thin, so we're just going to decrease that a bit. And the opacity, we're going to keep the same. Then we can name this brush again. We're going to name it liner. Click done. Test it out a bit, see if we like it. See what it looks like at the different sizes. But I think I like how that looks. So we can just move on. We're going to make our shader brush next. If we click plus, move our spacing down a bit. Stabilization, we don't need to worry about stabilization too much for shaders. Tapering, we can add a little bit of a taper. I think that's good. Shape, this one I do like to change, so we're going to go back to our source library. And I like to do an ultra soft, just to give that real nice soft texture. And then we can go to grain. If we like to have any grain, we can change that again. But I like to keep it at that blank. So we'll just leave that be. And then if we go to dynamics, we can always change the sizing again, but I think I'll leave that be. And opacity as well, we can change that. Properties, I want to increase the size a bit. And the maximum size, I want to increase, just so we don't have to worry about making the brush bigger if we need to. Maximum opacity, minimum opacity, I'm going to keep the same. And then we can go and name our brush. Click done. See how we like it. It gives us a nice smooth airbrush texture. We like that, so now we can move on. Next, we're going to be making a color block brush. So this one, again, decrease our spacing. Stabilization, we don't need to worry about. Tapering, I don't like to add any taper to my coloring one, since it's just used to make big block colors. Shape, you can always, I like to go anywhere between the hard, the oval, or the slim oval. But I think I'm just going to keep it at that round circle for now. Green I'm also not going to mess with, since I just want those flat colors. Dynamics I'm not going to mess with. Properties, I'm going to increase the brush size there. The maximum size I'm going to increase. I'm only the minimum opacity and maximum opacity alone. And then of course, name our brush. I'm going to name this color. Block. Click done. And then we can test it out. So that way we can get it real big, or we can also get it real small, depending on what we need. So we have the wide range for this one. Next up, we're going to be making our stamp. So again, hit that plus. Spacing, for this one, we've been all putting them between 10 and 15. But for this one, I'm actually going to bring it all the way to the max. And stabilization, we don't need to worry about. Tapering, we don't need to worry about. But shape is where we can start to worry. So if we go to import, source library, We can choose any of these brushes, which will give us our stamp. But if we scroll down a bit, we can also see that it has like a cube, some leaves, shapes, but crystal, little drips. We're gonna go with the flower for now. Click done, and we're gonna see those change to the little flowers. You can have a little stamp with, and then grain, you can always just leave it flat right there, or go to import, source library, and you can choose a nice little grain for that one. That one we'll choose this grain, and you'll see that it changes the texture in that brush. But you can always leave that blank as well. This brush is pretty great, so if you're trying to just put a little stamp on things to make it easier, or if you're trying to make a background to make it faster and quicker for you. Properties will increase the maximum size quite a bit, and the minimum size we'll leave. Then preview will bring it up a bit. For this one, we can use stamp preview, since we're going to be using it as a stamp. And then we can just name our brush. We can just name it Daisy Stamp. Click done. And then we see we can have our brush. And for this one, I want to go back and change the opacity. And so we go back, click on it. We can go to properties, minimum opacity. I'm going to bring that all the way up. Excuse me. Click done. And then we're going to see again. There, and that way we like it a little bit better now. Now that it can't be as, now that's more opaque.